Ephesians chapter 5. We'll go there. We'll have a couple other places we'll go as well. But we're continuing through the love and respect. So I just been starting with our slides up here, putting couple up here, just to remind us guys that while we're on to our chairs and going through things that we recognize as respect, and maybe talking more specifically to the wives for the last few weeks and how to show their husbands the respect that they need, for us not to forget as husbands to still focus on our wives. And sometimes we go through chairs and we kind of get maybe not emboldened, that's maybe too strong of a word, but we feel like, oh yeah, that's what I need. And so we kind of focus on what we need, and what we as men still should be doing is focusing on what our wives need. And I mean, again, there's a statement. So I've been reading the book. I've reread that book numerous times, and kind of as I study, and there's a statement that really stuck out to me, which I've read numerous times. But I mean, it's a fairly long paragraph, but I felt like I had to quote it, so I wrote it down, and I'll say it here in a minute. But for us as men, I want to make sure we still do focus on the fact that what our wife needs from us, and to not lose sight of what she needs and how she needs to feel loved in a day-to-day basis, and not just focus on what we need as far as respect. Now, we're going to talk about that, and as we go through the couple, or as we went through the couple, it makes sense to wives, it makes sense to men, husbands, that our wives need to feel loved, and these are ways that they feel loved when we follow this plan, among other things. And I think, at least in my mind, we can get to the chairs part or the respect part, and it becomes, it's not necessarily, it can become where we're not thinking about showing our husband respect, but we're doing things that we have to do, or the Bible says that we're supposed to do, and we can lose focus on the point of it. The point of the acronym of chairs is different ways as a wife, your husband understands that he is respected by you. Just like couple is for us as husbands, for us to understand how our wives feel loved, and we want to do those things so that you feel loved by us. The CHAIRS acronym is a way that your husband feels respect. And there are things that you can do, and ways that your home works, the ways that like we talked about hierarchy last week, and just the order of how things function in your home. Show respect to your husband. It's not quite the same as your husband being open with you or close to you, and how you feel loved by that. But it's your husband doesn't react the same way you do as a wife, right? He's not worried about, well, if you show me, give me the proper place in hierarchy, then I feel respected. He may not even understand that is what happened. But if we want this love and respect thing to work well, and not just while we're teaching it, but like in the future going forward as part of our marriage, we have to view the things, and obviously these are not the extent of how we can show love or how we show respect, but we have to view those things in a way that this is what I can give and do for my significant other, that is what they need from me. And so I guess, I don't really know, I said a lot of words without really saying anything. I realize that. But hopefully you see kind of where I'm coming from, and just making sure we're looking at it in the right perspective and in the right light. We're going to talk about authority today. And for all of you that I know, I don't think that we have a problem with any wives in here that have a problem with their husband being in charge or having the authority. So I'm not saying that there might be moments where you might not challenge that or things might come up. But in general, I would assume most wives in here are like, yes, my husband's in charge because that's what God says, and we try to follow God. We're not perfect, but that's how the order is. So we could take this lesson and be like, well, duh, I get it, and just kind of not really think about it. But what I want to do is understanding that submitting yourself as a wife to your husband's authority is a way that he understands respect, which is a way that he understands your love for him, and showing him respect, and that's how he interprets that. And so although it may be something that you understand and probably don't necessarily have a problem with, knowing that supporting your husband in this area is a way for you to show him you love him by respecting him. And so that's just kind of this perspective I want to give or get to. So we did conquest, hierarchy, authority. We have insight, relationship, and sexuality coming up. So authority today. So the subtitle that he has here, or a couple of them, is his desire to serve and lead, right? And as authority, right, and we've all seen that. I don't know if it's necessarily a meme, but the difference between a boss and a leader, right, with like a guy cracking the whip with people in front of him, or a leader out in front pulling people behind him. And the authority that a husband is given comes with responsibility from the Lord, which makes us, as the husband, the leader of the household, not necessarily the one to rule over, right? Not the one that's the Pharaoh or the king to rule over his subjects, but the authority to lead the home, and to lead the wife, and to lead the children as well. So his desire to serve and lead. And when you're a leader, really you're serving. I mean, we can look at our leadership that is taking our kids to camp this week, and they are in charge. They have the authority, but they are serving by what they're doing this week, right? And they're sacrificing a lot to be able to do what they're doing. It's in service. And that's the idea for a husband that's in charge, that has the authority. It's the service, it's the servitude and leadership that comes with it. So, but it brings up the question, who's the boss? And not the TV show was it Samantha and Tony, right? We all know. And that was, who was the boss? They were saying, who is the boss, this lady or this guy, right? And there's a statement that's written in this book by a wife that was being innocent and honest in her comment at a seminar he did. And she said, and this was publicly, she says, I want him to be the head, talking about hierarchy, and I want him to be the leader. Like, she wants that. But I just want to make sure that he makes decisions in keeping within what I want. And that was her statement. It's like, I want him to be in charge, but I also want to make sure the things he does are the things that I want him to do. And she wasn't trying to be, subversive. She wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but just honest, complete honesty. That is what her thought process was on the fact and on authority. And if we see that, we understand she's saying, I want you to be in charge. Just do what I want you to do. And if it's different, then we have a problem. And so that philosophy, or that view of authority, is obviously not the biblical view of authority. So to take a step back here, this is the quote I want to say, and I know when you read something it can lose a little bit, so I won't read it more than once because it's long, but it really stuck out to me, and this is just a general overall view of love and respect and why all these individual lessons matter. But when love and respect are present in a marriage, and that's how we want it to be, right? Husbands and wives process things far more wisely. And that's the goal, is to understand love and respect and process things more biblically, which is more wisely. They accept the fact that a degree of conflict is inevitable in a marriage relationship, right? You will never get to the point where it doesn't exist. There will always be a degree of conflict. It's inevitable. And as the conversation progresses within those conflicts, neither party overstates his or her position. Now think about an argument you've been in with your spouse, and how we say outlandish things, how we exaggerate things, how we go so far in the words we say, right? And that's when the crazy cycle is happening, right? And we'll say things that are just either trying to jab each other, barbs at each other, exaggerated, hurtful, whatever, things that aren't actually logical. We'll go there when we're in an argument. But when love and respect is part of it, the conversation progresses. Neither one overstates his or her position. No one, quote unquote, loses it emotionally, right? And that's really easy to do in a heated argument, is to let emotions take over and say things that you shouldn't say, things that you might regret. Proposals are made to solve the conflict. There are offers and counter offers. There is a give and take. And all of this results in a course of action that makes sense to both parties. And that's love and respect. It sounds like, a negotiating table, or we're trying to release some hostages or something, but it's a thought process and a perspective on the conflicts when they come, that nothing has to explode. Nothing has to get out of hand. Nothing has to go to a place that doors are slammed, people walk out of rooms, and you just can't anymore. I can't even, right? Those we try to avoid. Sorry, Dan, I just had it came to my mind. Can't even. But the idea with love and respect is that though you don't go there, you don't get there. You don't go to those places anymore because you have a perspective on marriage that you are there to do for him or her more than you are there for yourself. That your goal is to love her the way that Christ loved the church. That your goal is to honor him and show him respect like as unto the Lord. And when that is our perspective on marriage, when that is our perspective on love and respect, you don't have things where you say what you shouldn't say. Not to say it won't happen sometimes or that you'll be perfect all the time, but when those things come up, it doesn't go to those places anymore. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't explode. There aren't gross, huge emotions involved. It's logical. It's spiritual. There's emotions there, and of course there might be hurt there, and there may be things that need to take care of those things. But when love and respect is present, it's part of your relationship all the time. It subdues and it brings down all those conflicts to a much more manageable place and a much more logical place where you come out at the end of it where you both understand where you're coming from and you resolve it. You both give, you both take. It's a compromise. Not in truth, but in compromise of doing something for your significant other, for your spouse, elevating them and whatever de-elevating, bringing yourself down, not as cool of a word as elevating, you, right? Them up, you down. That is the goal. And if both parties do that, those conflicts are such more muted, such easier to get through and get over. And so as I read that, and that was in part of this authority chapter, I just felt compelled that I had to take a moment to just kind of back up a little bit or zoom out a little bit and look at it as a whole, because we can get into the individual nitty-gritties every week and just focus on that one thing and just kind of lose the real perspective of why. And that's the goal, right, is we're not going to have perfect marriages. But if every couple in here and every couple that's represented in here can have a better marriage because of the principles that are learned here and putting them into effect, I mean, that affects your family, right? That affects your children, your future children. That affects this church. That affects relationships you have with each other, friends, and new people that come in that we don't. I mean, if we can get our marriages to a place that is more God-honoring than it is today, I mean, obviously when you do things God's way, everything works better. And we can grow and mature ourselves spiritually within our marriage relationship. I mean, we're on the path to honoring God. We're on the path to doing things for him more effectively because our relationship with each other is using love and respect in a real way. And that's the goal. And that's what we want. So, end of opening statement. Now, authority. So, Ephesians chapter 5. Let's go down to verse number 21. And we read these verses last week. We talked about hierarchy, and that's just God's order for authority within the home. It's God first, then the husband, then the wife, then the children, and that is how it works. So for that to work, there has to be some submission there. So verse number 21 of Ephesians chapter 5, the Bible says, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, even as Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. So in this relationship that we have, in this hierarchy where God has given us all roles to fulfill, God has put the husband at the head of the family. He has put the husband in charge. He's given the authority, as he has the authority over the church, to the husband over the family, the home that is there. So culture, though, and we talked about Who's the Boss, and I know that's an old show for these days. I don't think I was allowed to watch it, but I was aware of it as a child. Culture has made it unpopular and even sexist to say the husband's the boss. If best case scenario, culture says equal. They're equal. They're co-equal. They have the same everything, right? And then you get even further, and that's even more muddled, right? And to say that the husband's in charge or the boss does not mean he's more valuable than the wife, does not mean that he is set above as in more important than the wife. It's just the order of how God has put things. Just like at your job, there is a boss. And there might be an assistant boss, and there might be assistant to the assistant, right? There may be structure. But if there were no guy in charge or person in charge, chaos ensues everywhere. That happens all the time. You can go to every Sunday school classroom down the row here. Miss Sue is over here. If she were not here, if it was just the kids doing their own thing, chaos. You have to have a leader, period. And God's sense of, or God's order of a leader within the home is the husband. And that's because it mirrors him. It mirrors him as God with us, the church. So culture has said it's obviously very unpopular, if not sexist, to say that the husband is in charge and he gets to be the one in charge. And the reason that is unpopular and sexist is because the culture says that they're afraid of the authority, of the power that the man has, and he may misuse the power that comes with authority. And although that may be true, there's also responsibility that comes with the authority. And when we're here talking about good-willed husbands and good-willed wives that want to honor the Lord and do the things the way God wants them to do it, it has to follow a structure. And you know what? In some homes, it may be a problem because maybe the wife is just a better decision maker than the husband. It happens, right? Maybe not in every area, but maybe in some areas. She may have better judgment than the husband does in some places. Guys are we can be dumb sometimes. We can have a hard time seeing things. We can be stubborn and not be willing to listen or give in, or even we might just stick with the wrong idea because we don't want to change, and might just stick with it regardless of the consequences. And a wife is there going, if you would just listen to me, it would be better. And so there can be some bristling there on who has authority if he's not equipped well to have the authority. But God doesn't say, as long as your husband's smart, as long as he doesn't make bad choices, he's in charge. If not, though, feel free to just fill that role. God doesn't say that. God gives us directions and expects us to fulfill our role. And that's why sometimes in verse 22, submitting yourselves, and we talked about this last week, the word submitting means to physically place yourself under. Right? So a wife, when you submit yourself to your husband, you are making the conscious decision to say, I will submit and place myself under his protection, under his authority, under his hierarchy, because that is the way God has said it. And that's why at the end of verse number 22 is so, so important, not because he's worth it, not because he makes best decisions, not because he's the smartest, not because he deserves it, but as unto the Lord. So when you submit, when you choose to submit to your husband, really what you're choosing to do is submit to God. And when you choose not to submit to him, when you choose not to place yourself under that authority, you're basically telling God you have a better plan. You have a better idea. You think your way is better. In this scenario, in this situation, whatever it may be, really it's not about him as your husband. It's about him as your God. And so when you look at it with that perspective, hopefully that makes it easier to submit to an imperfect man's authority. It should. Again, doesn't mean he will do right all the time. But you're submitting and placing yourself under him is following what God is saying, how he wants things to be done. Now, Ephesians 5:21 talks about submitting to one another. And the culture in some places will say, well, it shows you husbands submit to your wives, wives submit to your husbands. We are equal. We're co-equal. No one's over someone else. No one's in charge. It's mutual submission. But immediately after that, it tells the wife specifically to submit to your husband. Submitting to one another is basically just, again, exalting each other. It's saying, you are more important to me than I am to me. And we should do that to everybody. Right? This does apply to your marriage. This applies to your wife. Your wife should be more important to you than you are to yourself. But this applies to every relationship we have. If we're to be like Christ, other people are more important than we are. We go around looking how we can help others, not how we can get something from other people, not how we're better than somebody else, not how we've reached a certain level of acceptance and they've not gotten there yet. But submitting one to another is saying we're looking at each other as people and saying, how can I elevate them over me? How can I make them, help them, make them be better who they are, and not looking at what I can get from each other. So to say that verse would say we're co-equal, no one has to submit, you would have to ignore verse number 22 immediately thereafter, where God specifically talks to the wife. But that is something some people had done. But now understanding that meeting each other's needs is important, and as a husband and as a wife, you want to find ways with the authority that God gives your husband to show respect to him, to show him the respect that he gets by being in charge. And he would never probably even say, giving you the authority and allowing him to have the authority makes him feel respected. He may not even understand that. He may not even see that. But it is a good way to show him respect, which again is a way to tell him you love him, is to give him that respect that he gets from the authority that God gives to him. So when conflict does come, right, and it comes with some authority involvement, as far as the husband, honestly, where the authority comes with having the final say. And that's the way it could come. And the statement that I started with, to say you compromise, you give and take, you make offers, you make counter offers, those kind of conversations should happen. In a good-willed home, a husband's not going to just say, this is what we're doing, this is my choice, and this end of story, period. Every time. Every time a decision comes up, the husband's not going to be like, I think this. I will hear no comments. I will hear no discussion. You do not have permission to approach the bench. It is over. This is it. Done. Obviously, if that happens all the time, there's going to be some more conflict coming after that. Because you can't just, as a husband, no boss, no leader, anywhere just says my way or the highway. That's called dictatorship. And that is how lots of people get killed and how things go bad, right? And we're not about to do that at home. It's a bad idea. I advise against dictatorships within the home. So a husband obviously isn't going to do that. But the final call, the buck does stop with him, right? His choice and the way the family goes, the way the family chooses and the decisions that are made, even if they're heavily influenced by other people, falls on his shoulders to make those decisions, to make those choices because of the authority that God has placed on him. But when love and respect is present in that marriage, right, you can process those choices and those decisions in a more wisely way, like we already said. As the wife, you're not to force yourself into a position that a wife or that a husband must do what she wants, right? And you might have been there. We probably have all had situations like that at times where I believe the word is manipulate, where a wife has manipulated her husband into choosing what she wants to be done. Now, that can be done fun, right? You can have small little decisions, and a wife really wants to go eat here, but a husband hates it there. But she can really guilt him into it or really butter him up into it and get him to choose what she wants to do as far as where to go to eat, right? That's little. That's small things, and that happens, and that's okay. And a good little husband probably is going to give in. Unless what he eats will kill him. I don't know. Whatever. I don't know where that would be. Probably somewhere where they put corn in your food. That's probably where that would be. I don't like corn in my food. Everyone's like, what are you talking about? Another story. We'll get to that. Not important. But when you manipulate for important decisions, when you manipulate all the time, when that's the habit, when you hold things over his head, when you get him to try to choose things that you want him to do because that's what you want, we go back to the lady with the first statement today, is I want him to be in charge as long as he does basically what I want him to do. And that is not showing the respect to the authority that God has given him and showing him love and that you trust him and that you respect him and that you would honor his choices and his authority. That is you inserting yourself in places where you think you've got to have your hands on it as a wife. And I know wives, a lot, there's a certain amount of order and control that must be had when you have a home with children in it, and even maybe just a home with a husband. There has to be some order and control. And oftentimes the wife is left to deal with that and handle that within the home. And it can be real easy to overstep from the children's controlling, which they need it, into the husband and controlling and almost treating him like your extra child, right? And trying to control and drive and direct where you want it to be. And to some places that might be valuable, that may be helpful, but you have to be very careful as a wife if that is something you're doing, that you don't overstep that position, that you still allow him that authority that God has given him, that responsibility. Because if you start treating him like he's your other child, your oldest child, he might go along with it because, and we'll get to something like this in a minute, but a good-willed husband that wants to please his wife, sometimes it's easier to just go with it than start a conflict over things. But he will feel disrespected. He will feel belittled. He may not voice that. He may not even know that necessarily himself, but he will feel belittled and he'll feel less. And again, if a husband was not showing love to his wife in the way that she needed to and actively went against how she felt loved, we would not stand for that. It would not be okay. But because it's not really understood in that same manner, you want your husband to know you love him, show him respect. You want your husband to know that you are on board with him, and he can feel loved by you. Allow him to be the leader. Allow him the authority that God has given him. Don't try to chip away on that. Don't try to take some of that away from him. Allow him to bear that responsibility. Again, that doesn't mean you don't get input. That doesn't mean you're a doormat that gets walked all over and you have no say in this marriage or this direction of this family. No, it means you have probably more say than anyone else. And the thing with men is, you tell us no, or you tell us we can't do something, we almost want to do it more. Say, no, I will not do this. Actually, I've just thought about it. That is what we're going to do. And that's typically the response when that type of confrontation comes. But if you'll find, I believe, wives, that if you are willing to submit your desires and wants and willing to put him and his choices and authority and willing to submit yourself to that, you're more likely to get your way with that attitude than you would be to standing firm and trying to get your way. Because your husband who loves you and is trying his best to show you love, when his wife in a pleasant way, in a way that is not abrasive or confrontational, but suggestive and mild and calm and loving and respectful comes to him, he is more likely to say yes. That's just, you probably find that true in your life in some points, and it's not easy to do because our natural state wants to say, I have to stand up for what I want. I have to stand up for what my right is. I have to stand up and I have to be strong. But in this relationship with the husband and wife, a wife that is willing to give her husband the respect and the authority that God has given him and the hierarchy that God has placed him in, and is willing to come in and say, I will follow you. Even if we talk through this and I don't agree with your choice, I will still follow you, and I won't hold it over your head. And if it goes wrong, I won't say I told you so, but we'll just follow because God has placed that and you've submitted, you've placed yourself under him. When a wife is willing to do that with her husband, he is more likely to acquiesce to her desires and wants in a lot of things. And it feels opposite, but he will want to show you love. He wants to show you love. When you give him respect, the natural reaction, if we put the energizing cycle back up there, the natural reaction when a husband gets respect that he desperately needs is, how can I love and serve? How can I show you love? I got respect. It's overflowing. How can I love you? And so when it comes to the authority part of this, when he is understood that he's in charge and you will follow him, not necessarily because he's the best one or he's always the smartest one, but because that's what God has said, the outpouring that comes from his heart when he feels respected is love. And he will look for ways to love you. He will want to make you happy, make you feel loved. Doesn't mean that every time you'll get what you want, right, as a wife. Doesn't mean every decision you will agree with. And you can have those conversations, but you do have to understand that authority comes with responsibility. And your husband is responsible for that. And what he needs is the acknowledgement from you that he is the leader. He needs acknowledgement from you, not just what God says. He knows what God says, just like you do. And he understands the responsibility he's given. But what he needs from you as his wife, you want your husband to know you love him. You show him respect by letting him know that he has the authority. And you acknowledge that he has that authority, that God has made him responsible. And you want him to know you love him, acknowledge that. And make sure he knows that from you, that he has that authority, and you know that. Your marriage needs someone that's in charge, obviously, and God designed that to be the husband. Again, women can be fearful of becoming a doormat, but again, if he knows you respect his position, that you respect his authority, he won't treat you that way. When he knows you respect him and respect his choices, he's not going to treat you like a doormat. He's not going to walk all over you. He's going to want to love you. You're going to be giving him that respect, and he'll want to be giving you that love. I've been jumping ahead of myself, so I'm repeating myself. But if you show him your fear or distrust in him as a leader, you can create in him an attitude of, you're not going to change me. Right? If you show fear in his choices or distrust in his choices, the stubbornness will come out. Guaranteed. Because he knows the authority is there, he knows he's responsible, and he will put his foot down. And the crazy cycle and the energizing cycle, we see the differences there. Defer to your husband more often. Look for opportunities to defer to him. Allow him to and don't be like, yeah, we can do where we're going to go to eat, Burger King, McDonald's. Husband, you may decide. You are the authority. Which restaurant shall we partake in today? Right? But find ways that you have opinions on things and just let him choose. Let him be the authority. Let him make those decisions. Now, if he's designated and delegated authority to you in certain areas, which every husband likely has because that is wise, that doesn't mean you have to say, okay, black shoe, brown shoe for the kids. He's going to say, do they have shoes? Are there two of them? It's good enough for me. Right? You don't have to say, what color drapes should we put in the bedroom? I'm guessing most, not all, I'm guessing most men have no opinion. They will say whatever you want. Be like, look, I'm giving authority. What drapes would you like? Whatever you want. Okay, I've respected your authority. I will now go choose the drapes. Right? Look for ways that are meaningful, that matter. And you know the situations that they are. I'm not even going to come up with fake situations, but you know the situations in your marriage that you can defer, that you can make sure your husband knows that you trust him by letting him have the say. Maybe give your opinion, but that's it. And you let it be. And no matter which way he chooses, with you or against you, or it's not about with or against. It's just whether it's a choice you would prefer or a different one, be fine with it. Be okay with it. Be happy with it. Do you have a husband that's maybe passive and sometimes disconnected feeling? And we all, husbands, we can get that way. We can get where we're disconnected, we're quiet, maybe we don't seem like we care too much about things. We just don't want to have that authority. We don't want to have that responsibility. And you can ask him and he's like, I don't really care. And you just get nothing from him. And I'm not saying this is the case every time, but maybe he stepped up before. Maybe he had choices, made a decision, and was saying, no, we're not going to do that. Maybe he's like, well, let's do this. And you're like, no, that's a bad idea. We're going to do this instead. A husband will do that. And if he feels like he's still being respected, that we can have that conversation. But if he gets shot down, eventually he's going to stop. He will stop giving his opinion. He will stop attempting to lead. He will no longer assert that leadership anymore. And your perception of him is he's disconnected, he's quiet, he's uninterested, he has no opinions, he doesn't love me, he doesn't care about me. But if you honestly look at it, I'm not saying this is a situation every time, but there can be moments that if you've looked back and maybe he has tried to assert something or lead and direct, and you've nixed it. Eventually he's going to stop. It's like hitting your head against the wall. If the wall doesn't move, smart men just kind of like, that hurts, I'm going to quit doing that. And so they stop doing that. But from the outside, it looks as though he's removed himself. And essentially he has. He's removed himself from that authority because he didn't feel like he had it anyway. He didn't feel like he had the trust and the ability to make those decisions. So he removed himself from it. That's what a good-willed man will do. He'll remove himself. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's the right response from a husband. Those are conversations you should have, and that would go back to being open and honest with your wife and telling her about the things that are causing issues within your heart. Not closing off and backing away and saying, well, I'm just being a good-willed man and I will just now back away. No. Resolve. Take care of those things. But as a wife, understand your husband needs to feel respected, needs to feel as though you trust him and you entrust his choices. And that's why I say defer. Defer to him. Allow him to make choices. And when he makes those choices, support it. Right? Encourage your family to do so as well. If you got kids in the house, especially as they get older, they need to know, whether they're boys or girls, when they get older and they get to teenage years, they need to know that mom supports dad in the choices he makes. And when he says, if mom has said something and dad doesn't know and he comes home and says something else, mom should say, that's the final. What I said doesn't matter now. What dad said matters. You want your sons to grow up and be husbands that love their wives. You want your daughters to grow up and honor and respect their husbands. They need to see you as their parents doing that for their other parent. Because if they see mom just cutting dad down in choices he makes, your daughter's going to do that same thing to her husband. If your son sees that, his mom cutting down and basically going against what his dad says, he's not going to trust girls. He's going to think that that's how things are done. And he will grow up with a distorted view of marriage because of our view, because of how we handle things. So it's not just about getting at our husbands or getting back at our wives, but it's about showing your family what God says we are supposed to do. So just us not obeying doesn't just affect us. It doesn't just affect our spouse, it affects our children. And it'll affect their spouses, which in turn will affect your grandkids. I mean, it's a long tail on this. It's not just you willing to submit or willing to lead or not. It's about your kids. It's about your kids' spouses. It's about somebody else's daughter. It's about somebody else's son that's going to marry your child. And then eventually it's about your grandkids and how they view marriage. Like you have the power to shape that just by being who you're supposed to be as a husband and wife. So we as husbands and wives have to get over our selfishness, our pettiness, our silliness, our things that don't matter, and just follow what God says. Because it's more than just about us. Yes, we want a good marriage. Yes, you want happiness. Yes, you want love and respect to be part of how your life works because it's just easier in general that way. But if you can't get over your selfishness or what you've got that's just you're having a hard time overcoming by giving him respect, it's not just about you. And how selfish are we to take away what our kids' view of marriage is because we're stubborn, because we're selfish in an area, because we're unwilling to change or give, and then to affect our own grandkids? I mean, we're talking generationally here, based on how our marriage goes. And we may have bad marriages that we looked at, right? Your parents may not have a great marriage. Maybe your grandparents have a great marriage. But you can change that with your marriage. You can change that with the marriage you have right now, can change the course of how your kids view marriage. It's vital. It's important. And that's why submitting, as though it may be hard sometimes, to his authority is essential, is biblical. Okay, so a few things. A few things that you could do to help support his desire to serve and lead. Support his self-image as a leader. Support his self-image, right? Build him up. Give your husband respect. You know, men are tough. We be tough, but depression is real. Men deal with depression. Men deal with a poor self-image. Men deal with not being good enough, not being enough. I mean, the attack on manhood in this country in this world is just rampant. Your husband needs to be supported by you as his wife in his self-image, what he thinks of himself, how he views his successes and his failures as a husband needs to be supported by you, his wife. So support his self-image as a leader, as the authority. Actively search for ways to build him up in that image of himself. Praise his good decisions. When he makes good choices, praise him for it. Like, this sounds like your children. I know, it sounds like, well, give them a toy, give them a cookie. They did good, reward them. But your husband needs to know, you know, when he makes good choices, when things work out well, you should be grateful for that. You should be grateful for those choices and that wisdom that God gave him in those areas. Be gracious if, or rather when, he makes a bad decision. When he makes a bad decision, when things do not go well, when it's the opposite of the good decision, don't hold it over his head. Don't lord it. Don't be like, yep, but remember, 5 years ago, I told you to do this, and I know, you all know that. You all remember those moments. The husband has forgotten what he decided to eat for lunch yesterday, but you remember the bad decision he made 6 years ago, right? On the night of June 27th, 2010. Oh boy. Remember that bad choice? Be gracious. When he makes bad choices, be gracious. Be merciful. Be forgiving. Be understanding. Doesn't mean those things shouldn't have a discussion, right? To be more wise about things in the future, but be gracious when he does those things, because he's going to make bad choices. Thank him for his strength and being able to lean on him. Husbands, again, to be understanding the responsibility that comes with that authority does require strength. Does require, and not just you being like, all right, I'm going to be strong. It requires you to lean on the Lord, right? It requires you to have a relationship with him, and that's why you probably should be in your Bible more than anybody else in your house. Like if your wife is more spiritual than you need to start pumping more iron in this word, because you should be the strongest one, because she needs to lean on you spiritually, not just with your decisions and your emotions, but spiritually. Your wife should be able to lean on you as the authority. So wives, thank him when you can do that, and husbands, be worthy of that. Step it up. Be worthy of being able to be leaned on. Disagree only in private and honor his authority in front of the kids. And I kind of mentioned that already before, but don't cut him down in front of kids. Don't cut him down in front of his friends. Don't cut him down in the public. When you have disagreements, make that between you two. And be willing to talk about it, guys. If she disagrees with something, don't just be like, it's my authority, that's the way it is. Talk to her. Hear her counsel. She's your closest confidant and best friend. She may see things you don't see. Listen. But then wives, if he still comes back with the same choice, be willing to follow. Be willing to give him that respect. Give your reasons for disagreeing quietly and reasonably, and don't attack his right to lead. So, again, it's hard to do because guys will make bad choices. Husband will make a bad decision. And it may affect the entire family. I mean, there could be really big decisions that really could make a lot of bad choices, that could make a lot of bad situations happen. But giving those reasons that you have for disagreeing, keep them quiet. Not to say we don't talk about it out loud, but just be respectful about it. Tell him why you disagree. Be reasonable with what it is. And don't attack, because of the bad choice, don't attack his position that God has given him. Don't say, see, you're just not you're not smart enough, you're not valued enough to make these choices. I can't trust you in that. That will cut a man off at his knees real quick. So finding ways to disagree. And again, men, you have to be willing to hear it then too. You have to be willing to hear the disagreements. And it's, as a leader, as the authority and the responsibility that you have a responsibility to hear out differing opinions and understanding you may not have the only solution. There may be other ones. But how you approach that, wives, and how you bring that to him is important as well. All right. Well,